Good evening to our attendees joining us from India and Europe. And very good morning to those who have joined us from the US, including all the professors. So, my name is Shivam Shrivastava, and currently I'm a researcher in the area of marketing and innovation at the Center for Business Innovation at Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. It is my privilege to welcome you all to today's insightful panel discussion, which is being conducted in our webinar format. Our focus today will be on topic that has generated a significant discussion and interest, which is the semantics of meaning, exploring NLP's capacity to interpret the nuance across emotional, cultural, and economic context. As large language models increasingly integrate into critical areas like customer support, hiring, and market research, the consequences of misinterpretation, be it culturally insensitivity, missed emotional cues, or flawed decision making, have become a more pressing. So, some of the recent research highlights that while AI offers an incredible opportunities for innovation, it also raises important concern around inclusivity, fairness, and trustworthiness. So, in today's session, we are fortunate to have a group of distinguished experts to explore how language AI must evolve, not just to produce, the grammatically correct responses, but to a truly understand the nuanced layer of human meaning. Together, we will explore and discuss the strategies for developing more context aware, inclusive, and collaborative technologies, while also examining how businesses can harness the AI potential, responsibility, and address its limitation. So, so we are honored, of course, to be joined by our esteemed panelists, each a distinguished speaker in their respective fields. So before getting diving into the today's discussion, I would like to invite Mr. Venkatesh to introduce the center's aim and ongoing initiatives.
Thanks, Shivam. Good morning and good evening once again. Venkatesh Balakrishnan. I manage the Center for Software and Information Technology Management at IIM Bangalore. On behalf of the center and IIM Bangalore, it's my pleasure to welcome all the esteemed speakers of today's webinar and all the participants. I shall give a 1-minute introduction of the center. And we want all the participants to get an idea of the activities that the center undertakes and participate and also contribute in the relevant events going forward. CSITM, as many of you would know, is one of the oldest centers of excellence in IIM Bangalore, aligned to the digital technology management. Professor Shankadeep Banerjee is the current chairperson for the center. In short, we are a global net and industry, and the center conducts various events, seminars, panel discussions such as this, conferences and workshops, and all of them at the cross-section of technology and management and focused on training and supporting research activities. And the topics will be contemporary at any given point. And to give an idea of some of the events that we have scheduled for this month, we have a book launch by one of the eminent professors who was also a faculty and dean at IIM Bangalore. And we have also lined up a boot camp on artificial intelligence. And this would benefit a lot of mid-level executives on artificial intelligence. It's a workshop, one-day workshop. And for the event of today, of course, we have experts from research labs, faculty from communication, marketing, computer science. With this diversity and depth, it's going to be pretty exciting. Looking forward to the event of today. Thanks, Shivam, for organizing this, and over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words. It is now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our esteemed panelists who have joined us. So, our first speaker today is Dr. Sunayana Sitaram. So, she is a principal researcher at Microsoft Research India in Bangalore, where she has been making a significant contribution since completion of her PhD at Carnegie Mellon University In 2015, Dr. Sitaram's research primarily focuses on enhancing the evaluation and performance of large language models for languages which are beyond English. Currently, her research focuses on enabling participatory research for multilingual and multicultural evaluation and model development. From 2022 to 2024, Dr. Sitaram served as the director of the MSR India Research Fellowship Program, which nurtured around 65 young researchers at the India Lab, preparing them for career in research, engineering, and entrepreneurship. She is also a regular contributor to top tier NLP conferences, including ACL, EMNLP, and COLM. Dr. Sitaram also plays an active role in the organizing committees. Her impactful work has led to the creation of several influential datasets and benchmarks, which are widely used by research groups globally. Our second panelist is Dr. Nupoor Ranade. She is an assistant professor of rhetoric and technical communication at the Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Ranade's teaching philosophy centers on bridging the gap between academia and industry, helping students developing professional networks while encouraging active contributions to their communities. She has authored several peer-reviewed publications in prestigious journals, including Technical Communication, AI and Society, Communication Design Quarterly, and IEEE Transaction on Professional Communication. Her research interest lies at the intersection of technical communication practice and pedagogy, professional writing, editing, inclusive design, and ethics of the artificial intelligence. Our third panelist is Dr. Ishita Chakraborty. Dr. Ishita Chakraborty is an assistant professor in the marketing area and the inaugural Thomas and Charlene Landsberg Smith Faculty Fellow at the Wisconsin School of Business, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Chakraborty's research interests lie at the intersection of artificial intelligence, large language models, unstructured data, and online platforms. Her work has been published in leading journals such as the Journal of Marketing Research, Marketing Science, Journal of Marketing, and Review of Marketing Research. Her doctoral dissertation papers have earned recognition as a finalist for several prestigious awards from the American Marketing Association, AMA, including the Don Lehman Award, the AMA AI SIG Best AI Paper Award, and the John A. Howard Award. Dr. Chakraborty holds a PhD in quantitative marketing from the Yale School of Management and an MBA from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. Our fourth panelist is Dr. Nikhil Singh. He's an assistant professor of computer science at the Dartmouth College. Dr. Singh's research broadly focuses on applied machine learning and human computer interaction with applications in creativity, perception, and the behavior. So these areas converge around his central goal of designing AI systems that meaningfully augment human capabilities. His work has been published in top tier venues such as CVPR, ICML, ICLR, and Nature's Communication, and has been featured in major media outlets, including the New York Times. Dr. Singh earned his PhD in 2024 from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, where he explored the intersection of computational and human centered approaches to AI. In addition to his academic achievements, Dr. Singh is also an accomplished musician and composer. He earned his BM from the Berklee College of Music in 2017, where he studied classical composition, jazz, and computer music, and later served as an instructor. So, once again, I'm warmly welcoming you all to this forum, and we are truly honored to have such distinguished and diverse panel with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, you would certainly agree with me that we could have not assembled a more diverse group, as Venkatesh sir said, where we are bringing together a language technologist, a rhetorician, a marketeer, and a computer scientist who is also a musician and a media expert. So let me briefly outline the structure for today's discussion. Each panelist will share their perspective for approximately 13 minutes, after which we will transition into an engaging discussion. Today, the end of the session, we will open the floor to the questions for the audience. So feel free to type in your question as and when they occur to you. So the sequence of today's panel presentation would be Dr. Sunayana Sitaram, Dr. Nupoor, Ranade, Dr. Ishita Chakraborty, and Dr. Nikhil Singh. So without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Sunayana Sitaram to share her invaluable insights and expertise with us. Over to you, Dr. Sitaram.
Thank you so much, Shivam, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to be in this really diverse interdisciplinary group, and I'm going to share some thoughts with you about, my perspective as a language technologist about some of the challenges that we face with our, AI systems today. So I hope my screen is visible. I'm just going to.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
All right, great. Okay, so as Shivam mentioned in the introduction, my area of work is mainly in looking at how these AI systems and today's systems are really like large language models, generative AI, however you want to call it, how they work for languages beyond English, cultures beyond, say, the US or the Western culture, and what can be done to sort of bridge the gap, right? And so I'm going to show you a few highlights from some of the research that's out there about what the state of the art is, as well as what what can be done and what lies ahead, right? And so let's start with some of the progress that we know of today that these large language models are making. So, if you've been following, keeping up with what's going on in the LLM world, you may know that there are a few benchmarks, or there are some test data sets that actually try to test some really difficult capabilities of these models. So, for example, complex reasoning, or doing really difficult tasks that even some humans may not be able to do very well, right? And there are leaderboards that basically measure how things are progressing, how subsequent versions of models are doing, how new models are doing, etc. And this is an example on the screen of one of those really difficult leaderboards called the ARC AGI leaderboard. And basically, here, what they have said is that the top green corner that you see, if these machines actually reach that, then there's going to be a prize that is given to, I don't know exactly the details about the prize, but there's a prize that's going to be given. And the idea is that these machines get better and better, but also cheaper and cheaper at doing these tasks. And if you actually look at the progress, some of the latest models are doing very well, at least in terms of the, in terms of the accuracies that they're reaching on this task. And the costs are also reducing day by day, right? So it seems like we are making lots of progress. Here's another, basically a figure that shows another very popular data set called MMLU, which basically measures understanding across various domains and sees whether the LLM is able to answer questions based on, certain on various domains. And here too, we've been tracking the progress of these models over time, and it looks like many of the models have already reached the late 80s in terms of accuracy. And we started with very low numbers, like for example, the GPT-2 models, which were there around 5 years ago, right? They started with just accuracies of around 30. And we've already reached accuracies of over 80 in these models, right? And so it seems like we are making really rapid progress. And a lot of the tasks that we thought were impossible just a few years ago are now actually, doable. However, if you look at, some of the results from languages other than English, the picture is not so rosy. So this is basically the same MMLU dataset, but OpenAI essentially translated this dataset into different languages. and now measured the performance of several different models on these languages. And these are a lot of bars and numbers, so you don't need to look at all of them. I would just ask you to look at the second last and the third last cluster of columns, which says SW and YO. Those are Swahili and Yoruba, which are African languages. And these tend to be languages on which these models don't do very well, because there is very little data in these models that represents these African languages. And so you can see that even though for some of the languages we are getting to accuracies of around 70, still not as good as English, where it is in the late 80s. For Swahili and Yoruba, we are still at around 30 to 40% accuracy, right? So the gains that we have made in Gen AI are not equally distributed among all the languages. And there are several languages which we have not even tested, and several for which we expect the performance to be even poorer than the performance we see here for Swahili and Yoruba. If we look at other data sets that are either partially translated or not translated, so this means that the data sets are created from scratch for each language, we find that the picture is even worse slightly. So in these cases, we find that for these data sets where the data sets have been created for that particular language, because there is additional cultural context that is there, the models sometimes do even worse. So on the left side, there is a data set that was created for Indian languages. And here we see that while some models still do well, like the GPT models do well, there are some models that get extremely poor accuracy on these Indian language data sets. And same thing for another new model, a new benchmark, sorry, called Include, where again, where we find that for many languages, the accuracies are really poor, right? So we are now in a position where we find that for most of the languages of the world, the picture is very different from what we know for English. What about culture, right? So it's been shown in a lot of studies that the LLMs that we have today are biased towards the Western culture when it comes to cultural values and norms. So here in this figure, scientists basically plotted the cultural values of LLMs. So you can see GPT-4o, GPT 3.5 Turbo, and some other GPT models over there. And they plotted the same values from surveys that were conducted for people from various different countries. And here you can see that there are a lot of countries that are plotted here. I'll just give you a little bit of context on what this is measuring. So on the x-axis, you have whether that particular country, and on an average, the population that was surveyed in that country, whether it tends more towards survival values or self-expression values. And on the y-axis, you have traditional versus secular values. And so what we find is that the GPT kind of models, or any large language models for that matter, they usually sit around, the data points sit somewhere near the Western culture, European culture kind of data points. So you can see that the neighbors are Sweden, Norway, Finland, Germany, Austria, Netherlands, and so on, right? Whereas for many of the other cultures, those are quite far away in terms of cultural values from these language models, from the large language models that we have today. There was another very interesting paper recently that talked about how, some of these large language models, even if they're trained with data from a particular language, may still reflect the values that are much more Western centric. So over here, this is an example of some sentence completion tasks where you're basically given a sentence and asked to complete the sentence. So the LLM is given the sentence and asked to complete the sentence, right? And so here, the particular example over here is that after the prayer, I'm going to go with my friends and drink dash, right? And what they found is that, even in this sort of Arabic context, even the Arabic models tended to prefer answers that were not in sync with the cultural values of that particular place. And they found several examples like this in the models, where even though you're training it with Arabic language data, it doesn't mean that the values that the model is going to have reflect those Arabic values, right? So it's not just a data problem, although data is a large, problem in these kinds of scenarios. Same way, when it comes to AI safety or responsible AI across language and cultures, we find that in terms of flagging misinformation, in terms of content moderation, in terms of jailbreaking and so on, these models work much better for English than for other languages. So for example, there are examples over here in this Wired article about how there was a lot of misinformation in some languages which the automated content moderation systems could not flag, and this leads to real world harms. So the reason that most of this happens is because generally what happens is that these are all classification systems, these, whether they're content moderation or misinformation kind of systems, and the data that they're trained with is typically not available for each language separately. And so typically what happens is you have data that was collected for English, it's usually translated into these other languages and then used for training, right? And so the alternate approach to this is, of course, that you create data, separately for every single language, for every single culture. And of course, there is a problem of scale with this approach, right? So ideally, there has to be some middle ground between these two in order to actually make these kinds of situations better for more languages and more cultures. I'll give a couple more examples of some of the issues that we have in non-English languages before I end. So some of this work, I'm just going to tell you like the main highlights. If you're interested, you can go deeper into that in the individual papers. So one of the works from last year found that as the language resources decrease, the amount of toxicity that the LLMs output increases. So by language resources, we typically mean the amount of data that exists. So the lower the amount of data for a particular language, the more toxic the output of the LLM tends to become. In terms of stereotypes, people have found that even if you have fixed the stereotype problem in English, the same stereotype may actually be found in other languages, which are lower resource because you haven't fixed them in that. So it leaks across language boundaries. There is something called a jailbreak attack, where you basically convince an LLM to do something that it is not supposed to do, right? And you do that by modifying the prompt, by sort of breaking whatever the guardrails are that the LLM has. And so people have found that there are much higher rates of these jailbreaks when you attack with multilingual prompts, so prompts that are in non-English languages, especially the low resource languages. This is a big area of concern because LLM safety and security is a really important topic today. And one of the ways that some of these attacks can happen is by doing data poisoning. So you're maliciously inserting bad data that instructs the model to do something it's not supposed to do. And this also can happen across language boundaries. So you can insert data that is in some other language, which these filters or classifiers are not going to catch, but it will still affect the performance on the language that you're dealing with, say English. Okay. So there's a clear gap between English and non-English languages and cultures, and this is worse for under-resourced languages. And many times the under-resourced languages are also the languages that typically, have lower economic sort of standing. And so it's a real chicken and egg problem sometimes to fix this, to be able to collect the data in order to make the situation better. So what are the factors that contribute to this gap? I've already mentioned data as a major factor which influences how well these models do on different languages and cultures. But there are also other things. It's not just about data. The way the decisions that you take while you're making these models, the kind of prompting that you do, and also the kind of evaluation practices that are done, all of these contribute to this gap between English and non-English, Western culture and non-Western culture representation in these large language models. And so I'm just going to show you one screenshot over here about the kind of data disparity that exists in these models. So in the right corner, you can see the upper corner, you can see the pre-training data that was available for GPT-3. And the blue part is just English. And all the rest of it is all the other languages put together, right? And the other figure is the figure from the red pajama data set, which is a newer data set. The exact figures are not known for this. So this is something that the deep research system basically looked at a bunch of data and figured out. So we don't know how true this is. But the numbers are similar, that a large proportion of the data that goes into these models is in English, right? I won't go into the other details due to lack of time. So the reality check really is that these LLMs struggle with many languages beyond English. And so this leads to the situation of several real-world applications still relying on English as the go-between. So essentially what happens is that you have, say, an input coming from a user which is in Hindi, but since you cannot deal with that Hindi input directly because the performance is low, you end up translating it into English. sending the translated version to a model, getting the response back from the model, and then potentially translating it back. And due to errors in translation and so on, overall the performance and accuracy goes down. So I'll end with a couple of examples of some of the work that we're doing very quickly. So I mentioned that evaluation is a very big challenge for figuring out how well these models are working. And so we're working on a new evaluation benchmark, which will try and measure how well these models will do for Indian use cases specifically. So we are creating a benchmark that is going to reflect some of the real world use cases in healthcare, agriculture, education, and so on. And these will really try to figure out whether these models are going to be suitable for using in India-based use cases or not. The second thing that we are doing, which we will be releasing very soon, is a data set for doing culturally grounded fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is a stage that happens after the initial model training, which really steers the model towards a particular direction. And we are working on a large-scale data set to make sure that this is culturally grounded and also available in multiple Indian languages. This will be available to the community so that people can use it to make their models work better for Indian languages. So I'll end with that, and I'm happy to take questions later during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sitaram, for your engaging and thought-provoking presentation. Your work on building inclusive language technologies, particularly for low-resource Indian languages, underscores the critical importance of linguistic equity in AI. And by emphasizing community involvement and culturally grounded approaches, your research serves as a powerful reminder that languages technologies must reflect and serve all voices, not just the dominant ones. So we truly appreciate your efforts in making AI more accessible and inclusive. Now it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Nupoor Ranade to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Shivam, for that introduction earlier. I'm going to share my slides. I hope that everything goes well. So as Shivam had introduced, I'm Nupoor Ranade, and I'm an assistant professor of rhetoric and technical communication. Rhetoric might sound like a newer term because we don't have as many graduate courses or even a lot of focus on rhetoric in India. And that's something that I learned when I came here. In India, I had done an engineering degree, and here I've done all of my grad studies in the humanities. So I bring a good mix of both of those skill sets to my research. And that has led me to do a few projects. And one of my calls for action also is to get more and more humanists involved in the development of technologies, especially AI, which sit right at the intersection of humanities and digital technology. So for today's conversation, I'm going to talk about first the story of Human in the Loop, which is again a call of action for humanists to get involved, some of the challenges that we are currently facing, and then some of the solutions which have come out of the research projects that I have done in the recent years. So story time. One of the reasons that a lot of humanists do not get involved in AI work or AI development is because we are dealing with our own challenges and things going on in the field, which is almost giving us a very dystopian future. So here's the latest news that I just pulled off of Google, which is AI. If you put AI in STEM versus AI in humanities. So you'll see some of the gory picture of AI in the humanities, where we see things like, is AI going to cause the death of humanities? Will the humanities survive AI? And so on. It's adapt or perish approach. Whereas AI in STEM is very forward-looking, very positive note of AI future in STEM. And this primarily happens because the way we look at technology and the solutions that technologies have to offer. The STEM fields and generally the world takes a very transhumanist approach when thinking of technology, that technology is going to transcend human capabilities. Technologies like AI can do so much better, so much faster. The efficiency is great. The accuracy is getting better every day. And we can just do great things. And if you think of the philosophy of studies and scholars, they're thinking about the post-humanist approach, which is they're thinking about the relationship between technology and humans and working on that. Where I think humanists can really participate is the human augmentation approach, where thinking of technology as a way to improve human capabilities, using technologies as an assistant rather than replacing humans altogether. Now, this is the area that I'm interested in working with. And again, some of my experience from the engineering and the humanities really helps me bridge the gap between, the problems and providing solutions for augmentation of technology. Now, augmented technology has different areas. One is, physical abilities like using prosthetics. There are sensory abilities like using AR, VR, if you are familiar with that. Those can really enhance human capabilities and help them do things that they wouldn't otherwise. And what is the toughest part is this augmentation of mental abilities. And this is where a lot of the cultural nuances, which are invisible on the surface, cultural diversity, qualities, and characteristics of populations come into picture. And if they're not handled well, then they're potentially those technologies which are augmented could cause harm. Now, AI and generative AI especially is really known to do that through hallucinations and other forms of inaccurate content. We are seeing a lot of harm being done. And so one of the ways to mitigate that is for a human to enter the loop and try and solve them. I'm going to give a quick example of what I mean when I say augmentation of humans for enhancing some of those mental capabilities. These days, for conducting user research, there's a lot of persona design that goes on. So marketers and business specialists, they are trying to create user personas of users who are going to use the products, and then accordingly design the product capabilities, shopping websites for the product, and so on. Now, there are AI tools who will help design some of those user personas. I've used a free AI tool here to design a persona for a person named Jamie who wants to buy a new television set. Here's the output that this tool gives me. It has the persona, the demographic features, some of the motivations of why Jamie wants to buy that television set, who they are, what they do, and so on. So a lot of these traits that we can see are something that we could easily imagine as television users ourselves. We might be able to imagine some of these features, but then there are many other features which are, again, nuanced and invisible, such as what is Jamie thinking, what is Jamie's day-to-day look like, where is Jamie trying to shop from, and what are some of the pain points. The cultural diversity, thinking about this is again a very stereotyped picture of somebody who wants to buy a television set. There are no other uses considered or cultural diversity characteristics taken into account. Some of this can be potentially harmful because one of the ways for marketers to respond or justify the use of personas is that here's a classic set of users, potential users for this product. However, there are a lot of users who might not be depicted in some of these personas, which just get marginalized and the products never reach them, and that results into other societal problems like digital divide and so on. By introducing a human-in-the-loop approach, we could use different methods like narrative inquiry, ethnographic research, where we get to interview and get to know our real audiences, just to improve not only the persona, but also just identify some of these nuances of users, which might give us values and data about audiences who are using the products or potentially are not using the products, and finding out the reasons why. Empathy mapping is one such method which helps us do that. In empathy mapping, what you're thinking about is not just the user persona, but also not thinking about the whole day and what the users are doing, but what are the users saying, what are they thinking, what are they doing, and how are they feeling. This is a screenshot that I just took off of the nngroup.com website. But it's interesting to again look at some of these nuances where what is the user Jamie maybe thinking about. So is buying a TV, am I wasting too much time? Am I do I have the budget for it? Maybe this isn't the best time to buy a TV. And so there could be so many considerations which just go under the surface because these AI tools or automatic content generation platforms like persona design tools do not allow us to see. Now, here's what I think is important is the concept of imagined audience, or just thinking about who your user could be, what their characteristics could be. As humans, we only have so many imagination capabilities, and that is where some of the theories in humanities come into picture. And these theories have been going on for thousands of years and are still relevant today, which means that they could be utilized for understanding some of these cultural nuances. Now, an example of theory in rhetoric is the rhetorical analysis, which is almost the classic way of analyzing how communication is happening and what are the best ways or what are the strategies that are used for communication practices. Now, a rhetorical analysis will help us understand how an argument is structured or should be structured, the effectiveness of the argument, but also understanding the impact of the argument on that audience that you're trying to tailor your content to. This is an example. And then again, why are we thinking about rhetoric? Why am I preaching the rhetorical theory? Is because rhetoric is, again, a field which has been around for thousands of years. It helps us create persuading thoughts and arguments, and which are particularly crafted or carefully crafted for certain types of audiences. As you can see, the rhetorical history is from back in the day, like before Common Era, and things that were found back then are still relevant even today. They apply to different fields and disciplines, such as at the beginning, you see from 466, it's dispute over a fee. So there was a letter which was circulating, which was communicating the dispute happening between two people. And then until recently, Marshall McLuhan is a media scholar who has been using rhetorical theory to understand media and communication activities that happen using digital media, which makes rhetoric one of the key sort of theories that we can use for a lot of understanding of communication nuances. Now, what I've done is I have combined theory of rhetoric with some of my understanding of how these technologies function, like how LLMs are constructed, what are the workings and functionings of generative transformers, and so on. I published some of the results of conducting experiments, adding some of the rhetorical theory to it, and using and building up on the human in the loop approach through 3 different research projects. And I'm going to share a little bit on each of these projects. I've cited these projects so you can look up more about it from those citations. The first one is using the rhetorical prompt engineering approach. And this is where I'm using the rhetorical theory of rhetorical situation. It is Lloyd Bitzers had invented this theory back in the 1970s. And what the theory says is that if you want to create a fitting response to any communication situation, then you should be mindful of the audience for whom you're writing the content, the genre of communication, the purpose, subject, context, exigence, and the writer. And all of what these mean, I've put them on the slide. And so here, I think the most important aspects are audience, where you can, again, think of a lot of cultural nuance on who the users or who the readers of this content are. Another is the context, which often is lost in generative AI applications because we all come from different contexts. The context is built from the way we study and learn language. And the AI or machine learning algorithms can sometimes not understand the right context. The way we learn language growing up is by listening to stories, by talking to people, by watching media, and reading a lot of literature. So it's a story narrating and story listening approach to learning language. And as probably most of us know in this call, generative AI tools do not learn, or LLMs do not learn language in the same way that we do. It is a very mathematical and statistical approach towards learning language and producing content. And so by providing some of these ready-made items into the prompt, we can get a better output. And again, I'm using rhetorical prompt engineering as an approach because this theory is grounded in literally writing studies, composition studies, communication, and all of these areas which have been studying the art of writing for several centuries. So this is the research that was published in the journal AI and Society. And one of the ways that we tested this research was by creating 3 different genres and content for 3 different genres, in which first we just designed a basic prompt, and such as you can see here, write a guide to creating an account on social media networking app. Because a lot of my research is in technical communication, this research was primarily targeted for technical communication genres. Here it is targeting sort of a user guide. And using all these elements of the formula, we then generated a full-fledged prompt, which was full of rhetorical strategies and devices put into it. And then we were able to add the nuance for the audience. We were able to add the nuance for the context, such as whether the user is a novice, intermediate user, or so on, including their technical expertise, so that the generative AI that we used did not base it, or just did not bring its bias of this user being either a new user or an expert user. So it was one of the ways to eliminate some of those biases. Now, the next method or next research that I've done is on audiences. My entire dissertation project was on reconceptualization of audiences. Now, what I was focusing on was identifying some of the hidden users or hidden audiences that do not come up to the surface. But unless they come to the surface, how are we going to learn about them? Again, there is some rhetorical research from the 1980s by Eden Lunsford, which is called audience addressed or audience invoked. So what they say here, Eden Lunsford, what they say is that we need to invoke some of the audience responses in order to understand our audience. Now, some of the most common methods of invoking users' responses are by posting comments, Amazon reviews. Those are the most common strategies. But then there is also the different methods that we can use to imagine our audience through invoked characteristics. So for example, there is always these audience that are addressed, which means the immediate audience, which are right in front of us, that we can imagine easily. And then there could be different layers of audience beyond these first obvious versions of audiences, and how can we think about that? Some of that research that I've done is published in Understanding the Hidden User for Content Strategy in the Technical Communication Journal. You can look into that, but I just wanted to give a few examples of how can we invoke the audience. And again, some of the scholars on this call might recognize this theory which is similar to the participatory approaches for audience analysis. What it means is that we need to involve more and more users if we want to understand their nuances of either requirements, problems, cultural characteristics, demographic characteristics, and so on. Now, again, this is the most common example of how we can do that. It is through collecting feedback in the form of reviews, or the star rating, just maybe signaling with a heart symbol, which means that the information was useful, and so on. But there are some other more deeper methods which can be used for involving or helping our users participate in the communication dialogue. And one of them is actually GitHub, where a lot of documentation these days by product documentation companies is published on GitHub platforms. GitHub allows users to get involved, or readers to get involved in the writing process. So if you click the edit icon on GitHub, there is a very good chance that you might be able to go in the back end, see all the raw content, and start making contributions to that. Now, this is where the difference between authors and writers come into picture. So here the readers can easily be seen as writers because they are participating in that content, but not necessarily will they be authors, because the authors of the content remain the people who have authority. And with that authority, only they can publish the content on the front end. This is another way to involve your users. And the final way here is wherever, AI is helping write, there they also need to enable some kind of feedback mechanism in the interface itself. I'm going to quickly wrap up with this last research. This was actually a presentation that I've done in the past, so I don't have anything in writing, although I am preparing a manuscript for this. It is called Conscious Communication, or being more mindful about our communication practices so that it minimizes biases and potential harm on people. Now, I don't know how many of you think about it, but every time I'm saying something or talking about someone and something, I'm very mindful about the language I use. And here are some examples of terms which are totally not relevant or not useful or can convey the can cause harm to certain populations. For example, kill is a word that is only used in wars and can affect people with PTSD and so on. But the word kill a process is very common in computational work, and that can be avoided. Same with seminal. Seminal comes from the word semen, which means that pioneering or any work that began or was started off came from this, one scholar or this one person or this one community. And using the word seminal there is just irrelevant, because we know that knowledge is not just constructed by men in the past, it is by other people as well. C and above and below are again very ableist terms and might not work in all contexts. Insights and bellwether are some of the terms that I have recently learned that they do not have translations or direct translations at all. Bellwether is another term that one of my collaborators actually used as we were developing a proposal. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And I'm sure that other populations don't know that as well. So I looked up, and it just means an indicator. But most of the cultures, this word is not going to translate because we don't have the same stories that we learned when learning language. And so just removing some of those was the key item or problem that I wanted to solve using this research. I used the theory on canons of rhetoric in order to understand how some of these factors of race, ethnicity, culture, so just these basically cultural nuances, how can they be included as we are cleaning up data, which is then eventually maybe going to be used for training of these algorithms, which then produce more content for us. Now, the canons work at different levels of content development. And one of the examples that I have here is from the arrangement. So how is content organized is one of the canons. Here we see a report from Hollywood Reporter, and which lists Kit Connor and Kate Winslet as the major winners. It also has some of the folks from South Asian actors who are also listed over here. But just the arrangement of content puts Kit Connor, who didn't even win as big an award, at the very top, which is a very gendered way of arranging information. And then Kate Winslet was actually the one who won one of the biggest award that in those 2023 awards, but her picture wasn't included. There's a lot of ageism which is inherently embedded into some of these content writing practices. South Asian, again, actors putting them at the bottom, and despite their awards being kind of impactful, it's all this signifies how arrangement can really affect content consumption, and not just for us, but then algorithms are again learning in the same way as they're seeing and coming across the content, and some of these biases then get into the content as well. This is the IRS site, and if you have been through US immigration, you've probably come across it before. It uses the term resident alien for Indians like me who have been here for more than 5 years and are working on their immigration for permanent residency. Now here you can see that the language resident alien again could signify a lot of things. If you just Google resident alien, this is the picture that you get, which is a series in which this person is actually an alien. And so it doesn't translate well. If it doesn't translate well in the same country, it's not going to translate well in other countries. But here are some small like nuances again of language that really need to be considered as we are producing content. So finally, I did want to end with that call for action of humanists participating in AI development and technology development practices, adding the socio part to the socio-technical environment, and to not only find nuances in content and audience, but also understanding the whole ecology of these processes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ranade, for your insightful presentation. AI interactions, whether through localizing chatbot content. Truly appreciate your valuable contribution. And now it's my pleasure to invite the next speaker, Dr. Ishita Chakraborty, to share her thoughts. Over to you, Dr. Chakraborty.
Thank you. Just give me a moment. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Related to the topic, mostly related to marketing research, because that's the area I work on. So what I'll do here is I'll give a very brief outline that, how NLP or AI in general fits into marketing research, actually. And the reason I want to still discuss is to show that even as we are making all these advances in language technologies, there still remain some problems that only advances in language alone cannot solve, and that is where the econometric and behavioral mindset becomes very important. And the second paper is actually more current. It's about using large language models for marketing research, which is an area that we are all very excited about in marketing. And we really want to understand how well or how bad the LLMs do in different types of marketing tasks, market research tasks. I'll be focusing on two very specific types of marketing tasks, qualitative and quantitative research, and I'll be talking about that. But just to give a perspective, there are several colleagues and marketers who are trying to, use LLMs in a variety of ways, and we are just beginning to learn like what are the limitations and what are the opportunities in this field. So marketing and LLP and NLP. So just to give a starting point, and this is something which I have been very excited about right from the beginning of my PhD program, because I also come from this dual background of engineering and MBA and marketing. So I was very excited by the thought that marketing has several use cases for unstructured data analysis, text and audiovisual analysis. But just to name a few, marketers remain excited about consumer listening. So there's just so much our consumers tell us every day in day-to-day, in face-to-face transactions, as well as online transactions. And we want to draw meaning and insights from that communication. So we don't want to lose all the information that gets generated on a daily basis. The other part of that is very exciting to marketers is communication itself. So how do we design better ads? How do we design better influencer marketing videos? And there are many other areas, but these two are what I'm most excited about. Now let me move on to the first research paper that I want to discuss. It's a 2021 paper, Journal of Marketing Research. So it's fairly old work, and for those of us who work in this domain, we know how quickly everything changes. So I would only touch upon aspects which I think are still relevant and keep me excited about this work. So when we started working on this, the problem that we wanted to solve is that we see so many online reviews on different platforms, like for example, Yelp.com or Google reviews, and can we really convert these reviews into a customer satisfaction score sheet? Because that's what our industry partners were interested at that point of time. That can you really give me a score? Say how is our score on food or service or price, and can we track that over time? So that was the managerial problem we wanted to solve. And of course, the first part of the problem is a more well understood natural language processing problem, which is called aspect-based sentiment analysis. So how do you really figure out what are the aspects that are being talked about in a text, and how do you assign a number or a numeric value to the different textual words that appear? And that itself is a challenging problem. But the other thing that we noticed is when we're looking at all these consumer reviews, reviews are, something that people just write because probably they like to write a review or they had a certain experience. So it's not a survey where you can ask each and every person, oh, how was the food? How was the service? How was the price? So several reviews don't even talk about the attributes that marketers care about. So there are a large number of missing ratings. And so the question we had was, what do these missing ratings even mean, and should we really care about them? So coming back to the first part of the question, how do we derive reliable ratings from text, whether text exists? And for a long time, this itself was a challenging problem in natural language processing. To give a few examples where the challenges were coming from. So if you see the first example there, it's very easy to extract a certain word, say good, but it's usually the modifiers around the word that determine the true sentiment. So pizza was good is one sentence, but when the good comes with a modifier, not that good or not at all good, it completely changes the sentence. So that's a challenge. The second challenge is, which is very common in these reviews where people are just blabbering and writing longer sentences, is that several sentences have changing sentiments within a sentence. For example, the creativity in the menu could not make up for the disappointing execution. So if you just extract words, like in the bag of the words approach, and take averages, many sentences would appear to be neutral sentiments. And we do see a lot of neutral sentiment, a lot of sentences being classified as neutral, but that's not correct, simply because it's the sequence in which something is said that matters. And these are the challenges that we faced in those early NLP models. And at that point, we had designed a CNN LSTM-based deep learning model, which accounted for the spatial sequential structure in a way that helped to improve accuracy. And since then, there were newer models like BERT, and now there are large language models, and a lot of them are getting much better at this task. But the other part of the problem is something which is, which is also important, but which cannot be solved simply by making our language technology better. And that is, truly understanding, what does consumer silence mean? So when I don't talk about an attribute, what does it mean? And so the dominant thought is that probably that attribute is not important. And that's the ideology that we are trying to question, that just because you don't see something, in a review, that doesn't mean that it's not important. So let's look at other drivers of silence. So one of the drivers, for example, could be just informativeness. So you only want to add new information. And a lot of reviewers come from this mindset that they only want to add information that's truly novel. To give an example, if you're writing a review about McDonald's, there is nothing new about saying that it's value for money. It's probably something that everybody knows, but there's still a lot of value in talking about the service at a particular McDonald's that you have experienced. So a lot of McDonald's reviews, or similar restaurant reviews, would talk a lot about employees or service and so on. Then there are these specific groups of people, and the nice thing is we could identify this from the data. There are people who really just love to praise or vent. So, and this is true for real life as well. There are a lot of people who will only tell you when something is wrong. If everything is going right, like no news is good news, right? And there are a lot of people who only tell you something is good, and they really don't want to talk about stuff which is mediocre or bad. And so drivers of silence are different across different people. And so what we do is, as the second part of the problem, we use the panel data of restaurants and reviewers. So thankfully, we do observe different people writing reviews over time. And also the same restaurant receives multiple reviews over time. And that helps us to build an econometric model, which truly helps us to understand what does silence mean. And we also show in this paper that when you account for the right meaning of silence, or in statistical terms, if you do the right imputation for what the missing value means, that has a lot of implications for customer satisfaction measures. And so the graph that you see on the right, it just shows that how much the attribute sentiment scores can vary for a sample of restaurants when we account for the missing value versus not, using our econometric model. So with this, I just want to leave with two thoughts. First, it is challenging for NLP models, and it remains challenging to gauge the complexities of human language. But this is an area where we are seeing marked improvements with newer models. But however, the second part of the question is, in spite of all these improvements in language technologies, it's still important to augment NLP models with behavioral and econometric frameworks where we can, so that we can truly get richer insights. For example, trying to understand, what your consumers are saying when they're not saying anything. Because as marketers, we are focused too much on, what's being said. Having said that, let me now talk about some of the more recent work that we have done with large language models and marketing research. And this is an area a lot of us are very excited about. So as soon as we got to know about LLMs and everybody was working on it, we wanted to know, can we use LLMs for market research? And two areas that we decided to focus was qualitative and quantitative research. And and many people in the audience are aware of this, but just to have everyone on the same page, qualitative research is something like an in-depth interview. So it's done in a scenario where we know very little about a product. It's just greenfield and you really want to understand what your consumers feel. So you would do a focus group or in-depth interview. Whereas quantitative research is something like a survey, when you have a design, you have specific questions, and you can analyze the data quantitatively. So we wanted to understand that what is the role that large language models can play in this setting. And we broke the problem into different parts. And this is how market research happens. So the first part is recruiting respondents. And what this means is you need people to take your surveys or to do your in-depth interview. If people don't exist, then can we make use of LLMs? So can LLM take the survey for you, or can LLM uh, LLM be the person you're doing the interview with? And it might sound very silly to begin with, but that's where we started. We said that let's start with the extreme approach where LLM is doing everything, and then we came down to more human hybrid, AI hybrid AI human hybrid variations, where some of the roles were taken by humans and some of the roles were taken by the LLM. The second part is collecting the data itself, which happens automatically if it's an LLM doing. And then the last part is the analysis itself. So you have the data. Now, what do you do with the data? How do we move from data to insights? And in all the different stages, we wanted to test that, how well an LLM does. And in order to do this, we partnered with a large market research firm that is based out of Chicago. And what they provided us is they provided us with a lot of their historical market research that they've conducted in the past using real humans. And our task was to replicate this using LLMs. And this is the approach that we took. So these are the typical stages of research design. So as to say, you first design a survey, and I'm talking about exploratory research. There are also other types of research like descriptive and causal, but let's stick to exploratory for a bit. So think of something like an in-depth interview. You first need a questionnaire design. Then the next important stage is sample selection. So who is going to be the one participating in this research? And then there's data collection and then data analysis. So you usually in an in-depth interview, different types of data analysis include things like summarizing what are the main themes that you're getting out of these discussions, can you visualize these themes, and so on. And we said that, let's replace a human with an LLM in each of these stages and see what happens. The context here was something called as so this is a market research firm. They work with different clients, but this particular client was a food company, and they wanted to understand that how the youth feels about this concept of Friendsgiving. And to give some context, in United States, Thanksgiving is a big family gathering where families come together, and they are on the same table, they have food, there's turkey, a lot of other stuff. And in recent times, Friendsgiving is becoming like an alternate form of Thanksgiving, where friends, mostly international students and people who don't really have family here, they actually gather in the same way and celebrate the festival, but not in the company of family, but in the company of friends. And it's called Friendsgiving. So they were trying to understand that what the audience feels about Friendsgiving. So in this case, we already had the the questionnaire design. It was already run once using human participants. So our task was to replicate the same using LLM. And these are the 4 conditions that we tested. The first one is all humans. So this is the data we had from the company. We didn't have to collect the data. In the all human conditions, the questions came from human. All the people taking the survey were humans. The moderation was done by a human. So in an in-depth interview, there's a moderator. Just like Shivam is the moderator here, who's trying to make sure that everything goes as per plan, and the person giving the interview doesn't deviate a lot from the context. So yeah, in those interviews, there's usually a moderator, and then finally there are respondents who are taking the survey. And then what we did is we replaced each of these roles with an LLM. For example, let me talk about the synthetic respondent condition. So the synthetic respondent condition, the questions come from human, the recruitment strategy is all coming from human, the moderator is a human. The only thing that is different is we have synthetic respondents or LLMs who are doing the interview. On the other hand, if you look at the moderation condition, which is the third row here, what happens in the moderation condition is the questions are still coming from human. The recruitment strategy is coming from the humans, but now we have an LLM moderator who is talking to LLM respondents. And in this way, we build these 4 experimental conditions. And what we were trying to do is, and this is just to give an example of how we build these conditions. The synthetic respondent condition is probably the easiest one for everybody to imagine. And also because of the background that our earlier panelist has set up, I think this is now very easy to understand. So how do we really build a synthetic respondent? So as to say, we prompt the LLM in a certain way. So we say that, you're a respondent in an in-depth interview. Today is November 21st, 2019. I am somebody who will be guiding you through the discussion. And we tell the LLM, pretend that you have been selected to do this task, blah, blah, blah. You are so-and-so. Your name is Scott. You're 32-year-old. So we try to give as many demographics as possible. And these demographics, where are we getting them from? So we are not making them up. These are the demographics of the actual Scott who did take the survey at some point. So in this way, we build these online personas of respondents. And now you can imagine that we have done similar things for the moderator as well. So when we try to build an LLM moderator, we said, you're the moderator. This is how you should evaluate an answer. And what was happening in the background is we told the moderator that, this is the way you should score an answer. And if any answer is below the score, then you should prod. And prodding is a very well-known strategy, like in moderation, for those of us who have done market research. So what happens is, suppose I ask a question, how are you doing today? And if somebody's very brief and says, hey, I'm okay, and that's not enough for me, then I would ask more follow-up questions that, what does okay mean? Like, how is the weather? How is your work life? And so on. So we have given very specific ways. We have taught the LLM that this is how you should prod if you're not happy with the quality of the answer. So in this way, we have created these conditions, but the litmus test is, how did all this go? And so we had to figure out, and this is something, the CMO of the company kept telling me that, okay, all these experimentation sounds great, but like, how do we know this is even working? And, the first idea we had was very silly. Again, we said, let's ask the LLM to evaluate, first of all, like LLM can do so much, then maybe it can evaluate as well. But then we did other forms of evaluation, like evaluation in terms of more core metrics, like what are the number of themes that is getting generated from this data. And the other ways we did is we tried to test the overlap between the actual data which we had from the company and the synthetic data, using some embeddings, and to see that how close this data is and so on. But the real test is human evaluation. So we asked humans that, how do you feel about the different answers? Now one might ask that, who are these humans? So we experimented with all types of humans. We started with prolific.com because that's where all social science research begins. So these are just people we have recruited. But later on, the the market research company we're working with, they got more excited about it, and they said, you know what, we'll ask our own market researchers to be evaluators. Now, these are people who have done market research for years, and they are going to evaluate the answers, but it's blind evaluation. It's like imagine those blind Coca-Cola, Pepsi tests. You don't know it's Coke or Pepsi. So this is similar situation. They know the questions, they see the answers, and they have to evaluate which answer is good. So what happened at the end? Of course, no prizes for guessing. LLMs they always feel they're doing great. So in their self-evaluation, they declare that the LLM generated answers or hybrids are better on all dimensions. Now, where did we get these dimensions from? This is something we got from our old market research literature, as well as what mattered to the company. So some of the dimensions that matters in these answers is, for example, are the answers clear in the first place? Are they relevant to the business problem? Is there enough depth? Is there insight, and so on? And so the LLM felt that it's doing better on everything, and especially depth and insight. But when we tested it for other things, that, what are the themes that the humans were able to come up with versus the LLM hybrids, one of the interesting things we noticed is there are some themes which are unique to only the LLM hybrids, which were not coming up in the human discussions, but there was some overlap too. So the LLM was able to pick most of the themes that the humans had come up with, but there were some new themes. Then when we looked at the overlap, just in terms of actual and synthetic data, the key thing to note here is, again, for some questions, there was a lot of overlap. For some questions, there was less overlap. We went question by question. We checked where the divergence is most, and the divergence is most in questions where you can be more creative. For example, how would you want to, or, what would be the menu for Friendsgiving? So if it's an answer which gives a lot of scope for the LLM to, hallucinate or whatever, come up with new answers. So that's where it was really free reign and coming up with a lot of different answers. Whereas humans probably were sticking to a few things like turkey or ham, because that's what they have seen in normal settings when they have gone to Thanksgiving. And that's what I find very interesting also about, this research. Of course, there are biases in LLMs, but and have done market research myself in the past, but there are also a lot of biases in how we recruit humans for these studies. Usually it's just our comfort zone, right? Like, it's easy to recruit. Like, when I used to do market research myself, and I used to get 10 people, like somebody used to send them from an agency, all 10 people identical, going to the same college, doing the same thing. Probably they have a free period or something, and they've just, signed up today. So there is a lot of bias in how even human research is designed. And the LLM in some cases was calling out and saying, hey, you are doing this research about Friendsgiving. Why are you interviewing only 32-year-old Scots? You should be actually interviewing, say, a chef in a multicultural restaurant who is coming up with a Thanksgiving menu. And that chef would also have some insights to offer. So that part was very interesting to me personally. But then we went ahead and asked humans, and this is from the Prolific study. But we also did the same exercise with the experts. Of course, for that study with experts, we cannot really find statistical significance, because experts' time is valuable. So there are only 10 experts who could evaluate this, but I think it was 25 experts, but hundreds of people took this study on Prolific. And something that we found again and again is that people found the LLM generated answers are more detailed oriented. Again, this is not surprising, because LLMs like to talk a lot, even if you give them a word limit that you have to answer within 50 words or whatever, but they still would try to take the entire word limit. Humans, they get tired, especially if you ask them 10 questions. The first 2 or 3 questions, they'll be very detailed oriented, but when it's the 4th question, 5th question, humans just start giving up. So so no prizes again for guessing why LLM is more detail oriented. Insightful is something which we were very surprised. They're like, how can they have better insights than humans? And so this is something we discussed a lot with our expert panel. And I think this is something which needs more, further research to know if it's really true. And again, our experts were from the market research firm. I think it would be nicer if it's the client themselves who could, go through all this and say if these insights make sense for them as a business. So that's the next step we are trying to do. But some of the key takeaways, what we learned is that LLM generated answers, at least for qualitative research, which is more exploratory, they were perceived superior in terms of depth and insightfulness on some of the dimensions. And another interesting thing was LLMs have some potential to identify niche participants, sometimes overlooked in traditional recruitment processes. One of the things we did learn is, because we tested this moderation, no moderation condition, is that the quality of these answers can be enhanced through careful moderation. So we were so excited with the exploratory research that we wanted to replicate it for the quantitative research as well. There, the replication was much less impressive. And so what was wrong? What we found is that the variance in synthetic data is consistently smaller. Even if you create 100 synthetic respondents, there's not enough variance in their responses. And that's very different from the true distributions that you uncover from human data. Then there are some more disturbing things, like patterns of covariation are not fully recovered. Just to give an example, what I mean by that, if there are 2 questions in a survey, is this food healthy? Is this food safe? These questions are somewhat related. Like, if something is healthy, it should also be safe. And as humans, we understand it. And when you ask this question to a human, like, is this healthy, is this safe, there would be some correlation in their answers. But that's not true for an LLM sometimes. It can say that something is very healthy, but it's not safe. And then you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. So what we did after this is we tried to incorporate history or context into these LLMs. So what you do is, instead of asking them questions independently, you provide them the answers to the previous questions, saying that, hey, you answered ABC like that, so now tell me what's your answer for D. And the other thing we did is something called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation, which is a method by which you can provide context to LLMs. So the nice thing is, some of these market research companies, they had a lot of exploratory kind of research done before they do a quantitative study. So if this exploratory research is provided to the LLM as context, then that does improve the way they generate answers for the quantitative survey that comes later on. So these are some ways in which we try to make the models better. This is still ongoing work, and we are excited to take it further. But I'll just stop concluding that as marketers, we do see that LLMs offer great promise for certain types of research. And we are optimistic about the future in terms of saying that it is a great first step. It could help you design a survey. It can give a peek view, sneak peek into what would be the expected results. It might even help you determine sample sizes. So what is the sample size you need in order to get statistical significance? But what we learned in the process also is that human oversight is critical to this collaboration. There are many ways in which these models can go wrong. So unless and until we have a strong human in the loop who understands this as well, there are chances that there would be missed insights or even wrong insights. And again, this is a particular setting only. So we did this with one company, a handful of studies. So we want to do more validations across multiple studies so that there can be more guarantees of generalizability and so on. With this, I don't know if I'm over time or I just like rush through it or whatever, but thank you very much. I'm happy to take more questions during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chakraborty, for your insightful presentation. Your work on deep learning models that captures both the spatial and the sequential structure of language for more accurate sentiment scoring is truly impactful. Your key findings that reviewers' silence require careful imputation, especially in the cultural diverse setting, is crucial. And additionally, your emphasis on moving beyond the bag of words approaches to capture emotional nuances and culturally specific expressions in language is a significant step forward in sentiment analysis. So we appreciate your time, and now I'd like to invite Dr. Nikhil Singh to share his presentation. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Shivam. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so thanks so much for having me here, and thanks all for the very interesting presentations. I think there's some interesting synergy with what I'm going to talk about. Dr. Sitaram showed kind of the importance of evaluations and how well-defined tests can reveal otherwise subtle biases and issues. Dr. Ranade talked about how information presentation can affect behavior of humans and ultimately perhaps also LLMs. And Dr. Chakraborty just now was talking about augmenting NLP models with a sort of economic and behavioral mindset. And so with that in mind, I'm going to talk about the behavioral angle in particular, the case where LLMs become agents that take actions. And I'm going to make the argument that behavioral systems like agents need behavioral tests. So we're going to try to unpack how we can do that. So human behavior itself, which is our kind of baseline, is already very complicated. If we zoom into the specific cases of humans making choices, we've tried to analyze this behavior for a long time. It can be very complex and unintuitive. So traditional notions of human decision making, for example, assumed that we were roughly rational in a sense of maximizing our expected utility. And over the years, psychologists, economists, etc., have progressively destabilized this model by kind of observing the various limits of our ability to be rational. We also know that human choices are influenceable. They can be nudged in predictable ways by manipulating what is sometimes called choice architecture, the way that choices are presented and arranged for a given human to make a choice. And so, choice architecture is everywhere. It's in all of these sort of platforms that we use every day. Some of these examples will probably be familiar from our daily life. And so the argument that I want to make is that if agents are choosing for us in the way that they're often designed to, then the choice architectures that they are exposed to matters, as well as their responses to those choice architectures. So we've started to build LLMs into agents by simulating human behavior. When we do that, their predictions become decisions, and we should try to understand the shape of those decisions. So, things like computer use, operator, etc., are examples of this in the browsing the web case. And LLMs weren't made to simulate human behavior. They exhibit various idiosyncrasies, like thinking we're more rational than we are, being highly variable in performance, and being sensitive to various perturbations in their input. You might think we know these things from all of this research, so maybe we can deploy them wisely. But in fact, it turns out that our ability to generalize about the performance of LLMs is not very good. This human generalization function. So it's clear that we need to systematically characterize their limits so we can better understand how and when to deploy them. And so the setup that I'm going to talk about is a toy problem, and I'm going to try to motivate it. This is going to feel a little bit like I'm explaining a card game to you at a party. There's a lot of subtle components and rules. So if it doesn't come through perfectly, just try to keep the high level picture in mind, which is taken from this work on nudging humans. Cognitively bounded agents here refers to humans. And we take this toy problem, which consists of baskets, which are options that you can select, and prizes, which are the kind of objects that are available in those baskets. And the hidden squares that you see covered in red are going to tell you how many of each prize is in the basket. So here, that basket has at least 3 times 26 total points. And you can reveal that by paying a cost of 2 points. And this is called a mouse lab paradigm. It was designed to kind of make explicit these processes of decision-making that humans can do that are sometimes hard to directly observe. So I could keep revealing all of these. I pay a cost to make each reveal. And now I can just compute the linear combination and select the optimal basket. But revealing comes at a cost, of course. So one nudge that we can introduce here is say, do you want to choose basket 1? This is a default option nudge. If you don't choose, you will automatically get basket 1, effectively. That's the structure of many nudges in the real world. And we're going to try to see if there's some susceptibility to this. We have some condition under which you should accept the nudge, which is when the prizes are equally valuable, because the nudged basket is the one with the highest count of prizes. We don't care what the value of the prizes are when we select the nudged basket. It's just the count. So just to give you an example, here, this is the nudged basket. If we select it, we didn't pay any click cost. We've just chose to select the default option. We've chosen not to choose. Right? That's our default option nudge. We probably want to try to reveal some information to make a better choice. In this case, because 28 points versus 2 points is a huge difference. The prizes are not the same. They're not even close. And so revealing information from the top row makes sense because that's where we want, like 5 times 28 versus 5 times 2, the scaling factors are very different. So if we try to play this game to maximize our reward, our points, And the game comes in different flavors. It's a 2x2, 2x5, 5x2, 5x5. We end up with this default option nudge and a few other kinds of nudges that we can sort of implement within this game environment to influence the behavior of both humans and AI agents. And so one of those nudges, we talked about the default option. Another one is what we call information highlighting, where we don't call this is the canonical name for it, where you highlight certain bits of information and see if that influences the agent's choices. We have a suggested option nudge, which introduces an additional basket, so an additional choice, either before you make a choice, which we call early, or after you make a choice, which is called late. And so early, it would be, consider this one. After, it would be, okay, you've already selected one, but consider switching to this one. And there's something called the optimal nudge. I'm not going to discuss this because we don't have time, but you can read about it in the paper. This was designed under this resource rational assumption to see if you can get better performance by strategically revealing certain information at the beginning. So we transformed this into a task for LLMs, a playable, simulatable game sort of task. And I'm just going to summarize what our core results are here. So the first thing we can look at is how much do we earn? So on the left, we've got the human earnings, and we see for a bunch of LLM models used as agents in this context, they're taking actions in this environment. This is just from the default option nudge, just to take one example, but these results will be somewhat similar for the other nudges. You can see that some of these weaker models, like GPT 3.5 Turbo, 4.0 Mini, Gemini 1.5 Flash, and Claude 3 Haiku, these are smaller scale, weaker models, without the nudge tend to do pretty poorly. So their ability to garner high reward is not very good. But the other models, 4.0, 1.5 Pro, and 3.5 Sonnet, are able to make decisions that are roughly comparable to human decisions in terms of how much they earn, how much reward they accumulate. With the nudge present, all of them seem to be aligning a little bit better. So if you just looked at the earnings, which is what a traditional benchmark would do, it would give you a measure of performance on the task, which is about earning reward. If you just looked at those rewards, you might think the nudge forces these models to align. So under the nudge, they align. When they're not nudged, the better models align. So you could look at this picture and say, okay, there's some alignment. But what if we dig a little bit deeper? Is there really that alignment, or are we missing something by aggregating to this degree? So the first thing we look at is how do the models gather information in order to make these decisions? This is the human function. On the x-axis, this is how many cells do you reveal? And then this is a histogram, right? So you can see humans tend to reveal fewer cells because you pay a cost to reveal them. So you want to try to be strategic about what you reveal. You don't just want to reveal everything, right? But you need some information to make a good decision a lot of the time. So you should probably reveal something. If we compare this to GPT 3.5 Turbo, we see that 3.5 Turbo in the base condition and applying chain of thought prompting, the canonical technique, tends to sort of jump the gun. It makes decisions right away. Either it accepts the default or it chooses randomly. It doesn't sort of reveal information to make a good decision. With 4.0 Mini, we have a longer context window, so we can also add in a few-shot prompting condition where we take random selected human data, like Professor Chakraborty was talking about, adding human history into this sort of context. And so we add some history, human sort of data, and we see we get a little bit closer, but 4.0 Mini has a different failure mode, which is it's revealing too much information. We could call this analysis paralysis. It gets stuck kind of analyzing the task, trying to collect all the information it can, and wastes a lot of money in doing that because it costs money. Or you could think of it in a more general sense, it costs you time or mental energy in order to reveal these different things that might not be as relevant to your decision. And we can repeat this for all the other models in our set. Wherever it's possible to do few shot, we do few shot. And you can see that the closest alignment we sort of get is, from GPT 4.0 just by looking at it with the few shot human data. But we can also look at this more, rigorously. If we analyze the distributional differences with something called a two-sample Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, we see that all of the models still have these very significant differences from the human choice distribution. So this is looking at how much is revealed. If we look at how models decide what to reveal, we see even further misalignment. So this is what that looks like. This is a heat map of reveal counts by different positions in the grid for different grid sizes in the default option case. So this is the human case on the left. You can see that there doesn't seem to be any particular super obvious spatial bias or in a systematic way. But for the models, you kind of see there's like a bias towards the left. 3.5 Sonnet has a bias towards the middle. And then Claude 3 Haiku with the few-shot human data has this absurd kind of bias along the diagonal. Which really makes no sense. There's no information about on the diagonal that is useful in any way. So the model is clearly employing some kind of decision-making heuristic that is different from the human heuristic, which doesn't seem so obviously biased. So that's one sort of source of potential misalignment. And now to get to that core finding about nudge acceptance, with the default option, humans accept the nudge when it's available on average about 88% of the time. So clearly humans are susceptible to nudges. 88% is pretty high when you compare it to the control condition. If you compare that to all these other models, all of them accept the nudge more often than humans, and most of them accept them very, very often, like 99% of the time or 100% of the time, as in GPT-4o, which previously was the best aligning model, now is just taking the nudge all the time. So it's way more sensitive to nudges than humans are. And even 1.5 Pro and Claude 3.5 Sonnet are less sensitive to the nudges only in the simpler grids, the 2x2, for example, and the 2x5. When you get to the 5x5, they're, again, very, very sensitive to the nudge compared to humans. So on average, this default option shows very quickly this very, very sort of largely exaggerated sensitivity to nudges with humans. Even though that initial performance measure showed us some kind of like superficial alignment, here we see the divergence in the sensitivity to nudges, which we can think of as a kind of outside influence on the behavior of the agent. I'll quickly look at how we are susceptible to nudges, how agents are susceptible to nudges in other contexts. So in the information highlighting, we look at what is the probability that you are revealing information from the highlighted row. So we're highlighting a row and we're saying, when that information is, when the highlighted row is the optimal row to reveal from, you should actually reveal information from it. That highlight is useful. When it's not the optimal row to reveal from, you should ignore it. You should reveal from a row with a higher prize where the weights are going to be more consequential to your ultimate reward. So humans are sensitive to this optimality. You see that when the information highlighted is optimal, humans are more likely to use it. And when the information is suboptimal, humans are more likely to ignore it. When we compare that to all these other models, not one of them has the sensitivity to optimality that we observe in humans. I'll just point out very quickly, the closest we get is GPT-4o Mini with this few-shot human data, but you can look at these angles and see that that's still quite different. And again, in the paper, we analyze this in more detail. The last thing I want to talk about is the suggested option case, where we either before early or after late suggest a new option, a sixth basket that the agents can consider. And you see, humans, it doesn't matter a whole lot whether you suggest a new option early or late, because they're going to evaluate the options and try to think of what's my best option. So maybe there's a small difference with the late. You're more likely to stick with what you already have, anchor to the decision you've already made instead of go to the new suggested basket. But that difference is very, very small, very slight. Comparing to all the other models, we see much, much bigger differences, which is when you're, this is kind of like an opposite sign, switched sign nudge sensitivity. When the nudge is late, you're suddenly very, very likely to reject it compared to when the nudge is early, even though the value of the suggested option hasn't changed. On average, it's the same value. It's just that the presentation of that information dramatically changes the likelihood that you will follow that suggestion. So this is kind of an anchoring bias. GPT-4o has the least susceptibility to that, has the most human-like shift, but you can see how the baseline is very highly shifted, and so the likelihood of taking the nudge overall is much higher, even in the case where we get the closest alignment that we can get. So the big takeaways that I would emphasize over here are, if we want to understand the behavior of agents when language models become agents, when they're doing more than words, but they're actually performing deeds, we need to kind of look beneath the surface, because the superficial benchmarks that we have might lead us to believe that there is some alignment with human behavior and to overtrust these agents to make decisions on our behalf, when you look beneath the surface, you see that that's not necessarily the case, and they deviate in systematic and very severe ways from our decision-making and susceptibility to influence. And then the second takeaway that I would emphasize is if humans are nudge sensitive, which we show that they are and has been shown conventionally that they are, then these LLMs as agents seem to be nudge hypersensitive, going sort of way beyond our sensitivity to nudges. So the thing that we're working on right now, I'll just briefly say, is we're trying to go from this abstract task where we can rigorously study this potential to a sort of nudge lab that we're building where we can treat more open-ended complex tasks like online shopping and get stronger generalization of the nudge sensitivity characterizations to real-world agent behavior. I'll stop there and defer to Shivam to continue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Singh, for your fascinating presentation. Your research sheds light on the critical concerns, that is, regarding how LLMs respond to subtle nudges, issues that hold particular significance in a multicultural context where such cues often carry a deep emotional and cultural meaning. The idea that LLMs can be optimized not only for accuracy but also for empathy is both timely and thought provoking. Thank you so much once again for sharing your valuable insights. And if I may ask the first question to you regarding your research, suggests that the LLMs are significantly more sensitive to nudges, such as default options or highlighted cues, than humans. So, given that the real world decisions are embedded in the diverse choice architecture, if I may put it into that, often shaped by cultural norms. So, how might this hypersensitivity impact the appropriateness of LLM decisions in such setting?
Yeah, so that's a good question because we look at the case where, you know, what is desired from the agent is very clear, which is to maximize reward in some way. In many real world settings, that's less clear. Users have their own utilities. Those utilities are, you know, these very complicated functions that it's hard to infer. And agents are behaving in, you know, as you said, multicultural contexts in which the appropriateness of certain decisions or certain nudge designs or all of the factors that go into this setup can be very, very different. So I think we just lack good frameworks for evaluating that. And my intuition is that what we need first is to kind of understand at a baseline, what is nudge sensitivity? How does it occur? How can we reduce it as a more general case of behavioral robustness, more specific case of behavioral robustness? And then we could sort of extend that to study it in these different contexts in which agents are likely to be deployed. Because it might be that certain kinds of nudge sensitivity are desirable because they lead to human-like decisions in a way that is valuable to some community. And that's something that requires, I think, a more like large-scale systematic evaluative approach to be able to understand.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Singh. Dr. Sitaram, your work has been at the front foot of making large language models more inclusive across languages and cultures. It is well known that the many AI systems still struggle with the non-dominant languages, dialect, and culturally specific content, as you showed in your presentation. So, from your experience, what are some of the key challenges in designing evaluation frameworks that may go beyond accuracy to assess that the cultural relevance and emotional appropriateness in various linguistic contexts? And how we can ensure that these frameworks are integrated as a core element in AI development rather than being treated as afterthoughts?
Yeah, I think the second point you make is really the key, right?
Yeah,
Integrating these kinds of evaluation practices as core aspects of what we do as model builders,
yeah,
and taking into account, languages, cultures beyond English when we are building these models,
yeah.
because
Mhm.
a lot of the decisions that are taken are based on a small set of benchmarks, right? So, for example, if you're a model builder and you have 5 candidate models and you're trying to decide which one to release, right? You would probably test it on a bunch of benchmarks and then decide which one. But the benchmarks are not representative of all language, all cultures. And of course, it's a matter of scale as well. Like, how can you reach, as many languages and cultures as possible, which are representative without, running into the scale issues given how diverse the world is, right? So I think it has to be a balance between being sensitive about how to build representative data sets and practices, but also knowing that it cannot be done from scratch for every single language, every single culture each time. And I think we need to take baby steps by, first considering the major language families in the world, scripts, languages from different levels of resourcefulness in terms of data, etc., and go from there. So I think we have a long way to go in our practices. But as you said, right, making it a core part of the model building process rather than, an afterthought just to enable inclusion, I think that is the way to go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sitaram. Dr. Chakraborty, in your study, you developed a deep learning model that captures both the spatial and the sequential structure of language for more accurate sentiment scoring. So, considering the complex emotional layer in language across different cultures, how might your model be adapted to capture culturally nuanced sentiments, especially in multilingual review platforms?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our data actually was not multilingual. It came from Yelp.com, and we filtered the reviews that were mainly English. But I think just building upon what I have learned, from today's talks, if we had the appropriate training data and evaluation sets, and I'm glad that, like Dr. Sitaram mentioned, that some of this their team is actually democratizing and making it available for others to see. So I think that would really be the key. They're like testing, retesting, and having that kind of data would go a long way in designing multilingual review systems. But I think no matter what, and even the second part of our question, like, understanding consumer silence, I think that would also vary based on cultural context. So there are certain cultures where people are probably, they're more okay to put forward negative opinions versus in some other cultures where people are not that okay to say when things are not right, but they're more okay in being, praiseworthy when things go right. So I think that could be a good, like, interesting future study for us. And my guess is as good as yours because it has not been done yet. But that would be something I would be interested to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chakraborty. Dr. Ranade, in your research on localizing the chatbot content, understanding the hidden users, and applying the rhetorical strategies for prompt design, a consistent theme emerges, which is the need to balance the standardization for machines with sensitivity to diverse human experience. So, in multicultural and multilingual environment where users' expectations and emotionals expressions vary widely, how can organization and technical communication design AI systems that maintain machine readability while preserving the cultural and emotional nuance, especially when the subtle or the hidden users' interaction often go unnoticed?
That's a great question, Shivam. One of the things that I've also been working on is making AI visible. So just ensuring that the presence of AI or machine learning algorithms is present generally, just to sort of communicate to the users what kind of data it is trained on, whether an AI algorithm even exists in this case, what was it tested on, and those sorts of things. So I think documentation and just communicating about the AI's presence and how it works is crucial. I know the previous administration in the US, the Biden administration, had released this executive order where they had said and enforced that all AI systems and all the corporations releasing AI products should discuss and should document the use cases of where the AI would be used, but also cases which it was not tested on and the AI should not be used. So there's a lot of agency and autonomy in the accountability that gets added to the designers of these products. So I think by enforcing some of these rules, it would be really essential, or it would be really useful to get people on board to not only identify what languages are supported, what cultures are supported, but also the cultures that are not supported, maybe highlighting them through these gaps, and then designing products which would then be more inclusive to these diverse cultures.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ranade. Dr. Singh, your findings indicate that the methods like chain of thoughts prompting and few shot learning do not fully mitigate the LLM susceptibility to nudges. So, do you foresee opportunities to build systems that modulate this sensitivity dynamically and based on features of the decision environment, such as emotional salience or cultural variability, to better match the context specific decision making norms?
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting question because um, like humans are sensitive to nudges, and that means that nudges can be, used to promote good things like people save more money or, make better decisions in terms of environmental responsibility. Can also be used for marketing in order to get people to, buy more expensive products or more products in general or whatever it is. And the balance between those things is also kind of like context specific. Sometimes, you might say, find me the best printer to an agent, and an agent might go and find you a printer that is very heavily advertised, but not necessarily fit to your needs and your context. There's the other setting, the sort of like, positive nudges where I think some things become a little bit more interesting, even where like one of the canonical forms of a nudge is something like your neighbor is only using such and such amount of electricity and you're using, 50% more. The implementation of nudges like that tend to be context specific, like they're not universal. And so the desirability of being susceptible to that nudge, if you have an agent optimizing your resource use or optimizing your purchasing or whatever it is, your decisions, are going to vary. Do you want to match your neighbor or do you not care? Do you like there are these different sort of like social norms that impact the degree to which a human might be susceptible to a nudge, or that a human might want to act on the information that is encoded in a nudge. So I think being able to have more robustness allows you to maybe like have agents that intentionally perform certain actions or are susceptible to certain pieces of information, but at least we have some control and specification over that that we can prescribe on a context-specific basis.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Dr. Sitaram, a recurring challenge with multilingual LLM is that while they may produce grammatically correct responses, they often miss the subtle emotional tone or intent behind a user's message, especially in the low resource or, if I may say, oral first languages. So, how do you envision the future AI systems bringing the gap between surface level fluency and deep contextual understanding? Additionally, what role can participatory or community led data approaches play in making this possible?
Yeah, I think this is one of the major research questions that still remains to be addressed, right? So how do you actually get these models to go beyond, surface level, even in English for that matter, right? Like understanding of uh, things like emotion, tone, context, using that in the decisions that these models make. Of course, the reality is that for many of these under-resourced languages, the amount of data that these models have seen is extremely small, and so they cannot gather the any of the culture specific context that is required to understand some of these cues. And so one of the ways would be to try and gather that data directly from people from those cultures, and that's where the participatory design comes in. Those are the kinds of things that we've been trying to do. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the challenge is that of scale. How deep can you go into a community, into a culture, and you still need to go broadly and then try and cover many cultures, many communities at the same time. So it's always a depth versus breadth challenge there. I think that there are certain applications where understanding tone, understanding intent is critical, and those are some of the applications where LLMs will be used. For example, in healthcare, right? If there are health chatbots that are used and they don't really understand what the user is asking, or mental health chatbots, that's even more critical, that these cultural nuances are well understood. So anybody who's deploying LLMs in these kinds of really high stakes scenarios needs to make sure that these models are actually capable of understanding these things before they get deployed. So that's again to do with evaluation. It may be to do with collecting data for that particular context and doing some sort of fine tuning or something of these models with that data.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sitaram. So, next question is for Dr. Ishita. So, your research highlights that the traditional bag of words approaches often miss crucial language subtleties, and especially in hard sentences with the modifier, negations, or contrasts. So, could you discuss the importance of transitioning to more sophisticated models to better capture emotional undercurrents and culturally specific expressions in real world user generated content?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, it's very important to get into these minute subtleties of language. Like in a scenario like marketing research, for example, we are trying to learn from social media data, for example, which is inherently noisy. And there are people from different parts of the world, different generations. I think there was a very nice question in the chat where somebody mentioned about these generational differences. And so the way different generations talk, the way the same adjectives are used or short forms are used, norms, it's pretty important for us as marketers, like when it comes to social listening, that we get these things right. And I'm sure one part of this challenge is going to be resolved as we move to more and more sophisticated models. But like I showed before, like the models themselves are not going to solve the entire problem. It's also a data problem. It's also, this problem of where we are not inherently taking into account the behavioral and behavioral framework that goes into data generation. So really understanding the data generation process. So even going back to, my first papers, the high level takeaway really is, do we really understand the DGP or data generation process that well? Like if somebody is writing a review, why are they writing a review? Yeah, why do some people write only extreme reviews? So, answering another question in the chat, somebody said that if you're not a native speaker, are you likely to come across as more expressive or more extreme? I think that is correct. That's what happens. And also, it's a higher cost for you if you're not a native speaker than going on a platform that's saying English only and writing a review is just a more high cost for you. And if the cost is high, that needs to be justified. And so only if you have an extreme experience will you take the pain to go and post a review. Whereas if it's a low cost thing for me, if I'm very comfortable in the language, I have a smartphone, always connected to the internet, I just post about anything and everything. So of course, like these subtleties and new models matter, but also understanding, using behavioral frameworks to understand the data generating process is really the key.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chakraborty. My last question to Dr. Ranade is regarding your proposal for a human in the loop, rhetorical based approach to prompt engineering is compelling, of course. However, the scaling rhetorical awareness, understanding audience, context, and intent across diverse cultural and emotional landscape presents a significant challenge. So, what are the practical frameworks or institutional shift do you believe are the needed to scale this vision? And how can interdisciplinary collaboration between technical communication experts and AI developer be strengthening to make this a reality?
Um, Thanks, Shivam. Again, great question. And I think we've mentioned, or other speakers have also mentioned it through their talk. We are constantly thinking about how language functions, how communities have different nuances. We're thinking about culture, we're thinking about subtleties, but we're just thinking about also how these subtleties get captured through different languages. And interdisciplinary collaborations, I think, is key. And for corporate institutions, I think it's just identifying how these ecologies work, like not just thinking about algorithm, product, and testing, but going beyond that to understand and taking the effort to understand the impact on the environment, on the people, and also on just the product life scale, like thinking about the sustainability of the products. So what is the ecology made up of? And then incorporating the right elements, which includes human resources, who are scholars from other disciplines who would help like sort of bridge those gaps that exist in the research. For academic institutions, I think it does come down to policy making. We are seeing a lot of interdisciplinary courses upcoming here. I myself taught a course on equitable AI, which is sort of a responsible AI version for humanities students, but which also in my class, I also had students from the STEM backgrounds, from policy, from law, and we ran a really good class because the insights were being discussed in the classrooms and everybody brought their own expertise. So such collaborative opportunities within the classrooms can serve as a safe space, which can then be expanded to like bigger organizations and institutions at large. So I think some of these policy changes are sort of really immediate and urgent for the world right now.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ranade. So we'd like to take few questions from the audience. So there's a one question for Dr. Sitaram. It is written that what has been your experiences in dealing with languages data from the volunteers through Kyra, and how much efforts had to spend in cleaning and sanitizing the language data, and how are you taking care of the biases being taken care? So, Dr. Sitaram.
Yeah. So I think this is referring to the Karya, the company, the Karya company, which does ethical data collection. So these are actually not volunteers, they are paid. So there is a lot of data cleaning that goes on Karya's end itself, and they ensure that there is quality bar that is met, since these are paid you know data crowd workers basically. So we don't actually do the data cleaning ourselves. However, of course, there are sanity checks and all that are put in place to ensure that the data is of the kind of data that we want. In terms of biases, we are actually trying to collect those biases. We don't think of them as biases. We think of them as, those are the things that the community thinks of, right? So in that sense, of course, for some things we do measure inter-annotator agreement and things like that, where we've given very specific instructions to the annotators, and we are trying to figure out whether they have followed those instructions, whether they're able to do tasks. So in those kinds of tasks, we do measure inter-annotator agreement against some, for multiple annotators doing the same task. But for other cases where we are asking more open-ended questions, we really do want those different perspectives to come through from the community itself. So we don't treat those as biases.
Yeah, another question is for Dr. Chakraborty. So one person has asked about in many reviews, we encountered compound sentences that address multiple aspects simultaneously. So there's a sentence. So could we explore how to employ large language models to more effectively analyze and classify each components within such sentences?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. So these are contrastive sentences. So in our paper, and you can read it in more detail, we had a data set that we designed specifically for contrastive sentences. So which begin like this was good, that was bad. They have a certain structure, right? They either have buts or neither nor, something like that. So even in traditional NLP and then deep learning, we were handling this problem. So so the short answer is yes, newer language models should be able to handle these, but of course you'll have to test it in your specific scenario.
Yeah. So thank you so much to the all professors, as we are running over time. So we won't be able to take any more questions from the audience. Thank you all for your thoughtful engagement throughout today's discussion. This panel, Semantics of Meaning, exploring NLP's capacity to interpret nuance across emotional, cultural, and economic contexts, brought forward diverse, deeply relevant insights. Dr. Ishita Chakraborty showed how deep learning models can capture subtle emotional patterns and cultural silences in the user content, urging us to rethink how sentiment is measured across languages. Dr. Nikhil Singh highlighted the hypersensitivity of large language models to nudges and the importance of optimizing them not just for accuracy but for empathy and cultural awareness. Dr. Sunayana Sitaram emphasized the need to include underrepresented multilingual communities in AI development through participatory, culturally grounded methods. And of course, Dr. Nupoor Ranade reminded us of the human context behind prompts and how audience voice and ethics should guide AI design, especially in cross cultural spaces. So, together, the discussion made it very clear that building emotionally intelligent and culturally aware AI is not just a technical challenge, but of course, a human one. So thank you once again, everyone. And may I now request Mr. Venkatesh to formally close the seminar?
Thanks a lot, Shivam. Thanks a lot, all the professors. Kind of a discussion aligns very well with the activities of CSITM. As we have seen, we have people coming in from the non-government organizations, government. We have people coming from research background, and it definitely stands out. And we have topics covered from the technology front, from the cultural front, the geographic differences, generation gap, so close to everybody's everyday activities. So I'm sure this kind of discussions is going to be of interest to many others, and more people are expected to join if we have this kind of discussions. We would be more than happy to host you for discussions if you would be around, and we could have any hybrid kind of a session in future. And I'm sure you'll be in touch with Shivam, and we can look forward to those kind of discussions. Thank you all very much. Thanks, Shivam. Thanks all the participants.